Good morning, everybody. I am so excited to announce to you that you are participating in our first podcast, hashtag Channel EEO in pursuit of equal employment opportunity. Our debut podcast celebrates what was Executive Order 11246. The anniversary date is September 24th, and since then, that executive order has been rescinded. So we're going to talk a bit about why that's important, what we need to know about it, and what does the future look like without what so many folks viewed as protective guardrails to make sure that employment decisions were based on merit, which is a big topic these days as well, and how some of those safeguards helped ensure that. So with that, joining me today is Julia LeFevre, and she is a certified NeuroChange professional coach and founder of Brave Restorations. Julia will help us explore the neuroscience behind conversations and reactions to discussions on race, racism, any of the isms. And a little background on Julia. We actually met on LinkedIn. And she reached out to me and invited me to participate in her podcast, Wired to Lead. And I graciously and excitedly accepted. And then the day we were supposed to record, I chickened out and we rescheduled. And she made that hour together so enjoyable that I dusted myself off and said, move ahead with your plans for a podcast. And given the focus of this discussion, I invited Julia to join us today in our first podcast. So, Julia, why don't you jump in and give a little more information about yourself?
Well, hello,
Hello,
and
Julia.
thank you for just inviting me. What an honor and privilege, not only to be a part of your debut uh, launch episode, but what an important topic. And wow, I'm just excited to be able to, yeah, talk about this with you. So I'm a NeuroChange executive coach. That is a really fancy, complicated way to say that I help leaders and their teams to overcome things by helping to understand what in their brain, specifically their subconscious brain, is wiring or is wired to keep them stuck. And so, what we've learned, what the neuroscience world has shown us, is that information does not equal transformation. And so most leadership advice and coaching is geared toward external information, structures, processes. And we need that. But uh, the problem is that so often we know what to do, but we don't have the capacity to do it because of the way our subconscious is wired. And so I help leaders and teams to kind of understand that and even do some rewiring.
Okay, and that is exactly what we're looking for today. Some information about how do we learn to engage with each other in a different way, and more importantly, how do we hold ourselves accountable for possibly making room and opportunity to possibly be encouraged to rewire how we think about pivotal issues.
Absolutely.
So, with that, just a bit more about the executive order we're talking about. We don't want to make this a big legal seminar or anything like that, but it is important to understand the struggle for civil rights has been going on way before the Civil Rights was signed, the Civil Rights Act. An outgrowth of the Civil Rights Act was an executive order referred to as Executive Order 11246 that came into play in September 24th, and it required companies doing business with the federal government to undertake more strategic approaches to ensuring that barriers were really being reduced as a result of legislation prohibiting discrimination not only in employment but in housing, education, banking, just about anything you can think about. So this program, the Executive Order 11246, instituted goals in what are referred to or were referred to as Executive Order AAPs. There are two other AAPs for vets and disabled. Those are still in play. But the main executive order for females and minorities has been rescinded, and that means companies are no longer required to even set benchmarks, to track activity, to ask some of the questions that were asked before. And so we're going to ponder today, what does it look like and why do we have so many people concerned about the changes that have taken place so rapidly? So, Julia, when we set the stage and talk about the long history
Mm.
of racism and discrimination, and we talk about generational influences involved in that, what does that look like? And what considerations need to be taken when we approach rewiring when so much for some people feel like has been unwired?
Mm. This is such a big question. And Teresa, one of the things I think we have to talk about, and it's funny, really what we're talking about is triggered responses.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this topic has become a triggering topic. So
I completely agree.
I just want to acknowledge that uh, the things that we talk about today, I just want to invite your listeners to consider, what does your body do as you're listening? Because for many people, I don't go through a day. Even last night, I was talking about something with my husband. We have different opinions. And guess what? My body
Hmm.
felt very quickly. And I have done a lot of work and I've trained, but I had to really take note of that, because what happens is that our brains are trained to keep us safe. They're also trained, or not trained, they just are,
Right.
they I kind of call our brains a little bit lazy, right? Because they are looking for any shortcut to be efficient. Like our brains love efficiency. And so what happens is that our brains create trigger points, not just for things like what we're talking about, but even, have you ever been driving somewhere that you go all the time and you get there and you think, I don't even remember getting here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, what just happened with the last 5 minutes, right? Like, how did I do this? Or, I always put my keys here and I don't even think about it because your brain is creating these shortcuts. Well, it does that for everything, even for things like cultural phenomenon. And so what happens, we call that unconscious bias. And I'm even just recognizing that that phrase is going to be triggering to some because
Mm-hmm.
it feels like a moral issue. Like I'm
Right.
not supposed to have bias. But I want people to understand that it's not a moral issue. It's simply a neurological shortcut that based on your past experiences, your brain has put together a formula for what is easiest to operate out of and according to. So when we think about racial bias or gender bias, the reason that the government decided to put a framework around that is because, it was trying to create an external, well, you use the word guardrail. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's start shifting the way that we think and believe. The problem is that they rewired the system for a bit, but if people's brains all their past experiences had lived in a world that was not equal opportunity. It was not everybody gets a chance. And so to change that, to change the external structures without addressing the internal wiring of people's minds, it leaves it powerless, really. I mean, it's the difference, and I think that's where our resistance comes, because then your brain, everybody knows. Last night when I was having my conversation with my husband, I didn't decide to get tense. My body just did. It's not a decision, it's a wiring, a wired response. And so we have to understand what has wired us and what the neurological or the neuroscience world has told us and has helped us understand is that it's not what's told to us that wires us, it's our experiences. And so if your past experience was that only men are smart and can do this job, and that was reinforced. And so you only worked with men who
Mhm.
were a certain demographic. Your brain literally had that experience imprinted in in its mind, in your subconscious. So if people start saying, well, wait, women should come here, your brain is automatically going to say, wait a minute,
Right.
I don't like this. And that's not a moral response. It is simply a wired response.
And I like that example. And I use one, in some of my training and trying to take it to something that, outside of the race and gender, especially to kind of keep reactions down a little bit before we get into the
Yeah.
deeper end of the pool. Um, my own experience with animals. I
Mm,
grew up loving dogs. My family encouraged loving dogs. What my family did not encourage and really discouraged wholeheartedly was the concept of a cat being a pet for our family. And that was reinforced so much, and it was like generational. I mean, a lot of people in my family. And I had a lot of friends with cats. So, long story short, I reacted to a cat coming close to me, jumped up, freaked out. One of my friends said, "What the heck did a cat ever do to you?" And I sat a minute and thought about that, and I'm like, well, nothing, because I've never been around a cat. I never wanted to hold a cat. And it was a couple of days later that conversation kept bothering me, and I thought that was programming. My brain was imprinted with the
Yep.
concept that dogs are great, cats are bad. Is that a good correlation to kind of use to,
Absolutely. And you said something that's really important because you had never had a cat. You had never had a good experience to go against what you had been wired for.
That's exactly right.
And so and I imagine, when it jumped up on you, you didn't decide, oh, I'm
Oh
going to
no,
freak out.
my
Your
whole body.
your body just did it. And so it's a fabulous example. And I imagine, I mean, I don't know if you've decided to give cats another try.
I
Um,
have two now.
what?
One just showed up, a little stray. I tried to run in the door and get away from him. He got in the door first, and he's never left, and his little sister tagged along.
Well, oh my goodness. So, isn't that so interesting?
Yes, it
Because
is.
you had a new experience with a cat and realized, oh, all these things that I thought were true aren't. And so can I bring up my fun brain model here?
Yes, you can,
So
definitely.
if people are just listening, then you'll have to just imagine a cross section of a brain, but essentially, the brain works from the bottom up. And so your brainstem is the first part of your brain that receives the stimulus of whatever you are experiencing. The brainstem's primary job is to keep you alive. So it's asking, is this life or death? Well, a cat jumping up on you wasn't life or death, but it but then the next question is up here in your limbic system where the amygdala is and the hypothalamus, and there's just a lot of different, your subconscious up here. And so it looks kind of like a gas tank, by the way, and so I call it the brain tank. But the question that this part of your brain is asking is, am I safe? As far as relationally safe? Well, you were physically safe, but this issue, it kind of goes into both of those questions because there was something that didn't feel safe. I don't know if your brain thought that you were life and death not safe, but there was something in that space where it said, nope, this isn't good, and it shot the information straight back down into your body for a
Hmm.
bodily response before your conscious brain ever had a chance to even think about it. It didn't even know what was happening until your friend said, "What did a cat ever do to you?" And then
And
you're like,
then
"Oh,
and then I'm serious. I was like, I have never even engaged with the cat before.
like I don't know." And so one thing this limbic system does not like is things that are unknown. Well, it didn't know this experience. So
Right.
it's going to interject the stress response of fight or flight. And you experience that. But then how powerful that I imagine when your cat jumps up on you now, you're not freaking out because you've had new experiences that have rewired this subconscious part of your brain. And so now you can receive whatever the cat's giving you and you can actually enjoy it. And it's such a great precursor for what we're wanting as, we're still addressing civil rights.
Right. And like you said, that little stray cat coming up to me kind of put me to the test. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And I could have just ran in and shooed it out. Um, so when we talk about, and especially when we look at the attempts that have been made in having discussions that were supposed to put us in a safe place,
Yeah.
the DEI arena. I never thought I would see the day that there was so much controversy around DEI.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was because, as you indicated, people felt attacked in some ways because of their viewpoints.
Yes. And that's so what was meant to provide safety um, actually created more resistance because of exactly this happening. It was something new that I think people didn't understand fully, but the other um, the other piece is that expanding opportunities for others. We live in this world that's so black and white. It's either or. I either have power or I don't. I either have privilege or I don't. And our ability to be integrated and to be okay with I can have privilege and I want to extend it to all people who, have the same gifts that I
Exactly.
do. But I think in our culture today, there's a sense of no, I have to give up. I have to lose. And when people start fearing that they're going to lose something, the key word here is fear.
Right.
Fear will automatically trigger this fight or flight stress response that's in that subconscious part of our brain. And what happens is that we want to address fear with rules,
Right.
but it doesn't work. And so controlling people doesn't change anything.
And I love when you say, we try to solve the problem with rules because over the years, I just, I'm very candid. And I say, but what's the little thing they always say about rules?
They're made to
Rules
be
are made to
broken.
be broken.
Because people don't like to be controlled and they don't like to be told what to do.
So when we look at moving forward,
Mm,
in the past, to help an individual understand their programming, and I think these are tests designed to help you see possible areas of unconscious bias,
mhm,
the, tests you can take it, online.
mhm.
And many of those tests were used repeatedly in training. And again, those can be good and they can also be bad because the same reaction of if I think I'm the most equal opportunity gal in the world and I take a test and it shows something other, then some people have a tendency to say, that's not really me, that's a flawed test because I'm
Mm.
not like that. So, what tools do we use to get down and help address or get a conversation going to where we can bring people back just to the middle or even, a third of the way
Yeah, even to
to
the
getting back to some
conversation.
discussion that doesn't, get into the point where it's a shouting match and nobody's understanding anybody.
Yeah. Well, Teresa, I really believe it needs to be reframed from compliance. I mean, even that word, it kind of makes me tense up, right? We need to shift it from compliance to a sense of growth and even just human good. Like, can we somehow integrate the idea of community and group again? And, you know, again, DEI even was framed as growth, but it it really did, instead of activating a curiosity, it activated more fear.
Mm-hmm.
It became
And
politicized, right?
right. And one thing I want to say, and this is actually very true, when affirmative action came into play, it was never intended to be in
Mm.
place forever. The executive order, the original executive order, was not embedded in the actual laws. That's why it could be undone
And
with
then,
another competing executive order.
yeah.
The intent was that over time, with those forced rules for a while, that companies would see, hey, I had
It's
all these
good.
viewpoints about women in the workforce, and guess what? Have it isn't what I was told it would be, or that
Yeah,
they're not qualified. You get where I'm going? It was never intended to
absolutely.
last that long.
Really,
And
it was a structure to try and help facilitate new experiences for people
exactly.
with the hope that those experiences would rewire. I
And I
think,
will say that it did, you know,
mhm.
I often ponder what would we look like if the executive order had never
Oh,
gone into play. So
yeah.
there has been a lot of gains, and I completely agree with you on terminology. And I think that's where affirmative action, when we start talking about you have to consider every applicant that's minimally qualified, when we start talking about underrepresentation in the way that it sounds like, okay, if we're down in this area, the next three hires are going to be this. That's
Mm-hmm.
not how it is. But now, with the increased animosity, and you're right, we can't even use the words DEI anymore.
Mm-mm.
You know what I'm saying? There's
Yeah.
risk for companies to talk about DEI programs, DEI training.
Yeah. I think
So I
the
think,
thing that just grieves me so much is that we, humans are wired for belonging. When you think about the things that drive our brain are human connections. The longest running Harvard study on human happiness has pointed back to it's the quality of your relational connections with people. Because we spend so much time in the workplace, that presents such an opportunity for human flourishing, like for life to be good. And yet, if we're looking at creating cultures that are protective, we're operating out of fear, we're missing the beauty that comes from working with people who are different than you, with working with people who are going to bring gifts to contribute to a level of synergy that's going to help your organization. The research is very clear. Diverse teams thrive more than non-diverse teams. So, but what even all of that is all logical information that only is going to get to your prefrontal cortex if we're first addressing the unconscious bias that is lodged in your subconscious. And you alluded to this before, but just, what happens when somebody is not conscious of their bias, right? I mean, that's the whole nature of this. Then we get defensive. And, they refer to that as this cognitive dissonance that
mhm,
in their brain, in their thinking brain, they believe that they are the most open, loving person.
right,
But when it comes to in the moment responses, their responses say something different.
right.
So, I mean, I have a story that if anyone looks up a picture of our family, our youngest son is African American. He was born in Africa and then adopted here to America. And I grew up in an all-white community, rural community. And if our family would not be possible, and Teresa, because I have not had as many interactions with African Americans as I have with white. And my body will still respond in a negative way because of some of the wiring I've had. And my son is African American. So I only tell people that to try and break down the idea that I'm a bad person because my body has that. I'm not. I'm actively working toward rewiring by putting myself in certain situations where I can rewire that. And
Exactly.
and so now I have so many friends who look different than me, and it is just just I don't want this to sound condescending, but just like you had a new experience with cats, I have new experience with not just people of a different race, but of different socioeconomic
Exactly.
position,
Exactly.
of
Because again,
anything.
discrimination is not centered solely on race and gender. And we
No.
know, it impacts everything where you live. rural versus urban
Yep.
communities,
Yep.
stereotypes. I'll never forget someone saying that they hope Clinton didn't win the election because of a Southern accent because it makes our country sound stupid. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm from Kentucky. So you're saying all my family.
It
You
makes me
get where I'm
sound, you
going.
think I'm stupid?
But I think the point again
Yeah.
is, and I think sometimes it takes someone in a bigger group to be comfortable enough with their evolution to
Yes.
do what I did with that young lady. And I did it nicely, kind of joking. But the point was,
Mhm.
wow, that's such a broad stereotype, you know?
Yeah.
And the impact of that when people just kind of laugh it off. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, there's a deeper connection there. So we could go on for so long, and I think that we'll revisit this from time to time. But I really, really want to thank you for shedding some light on the psychological impacts of prejudice and discrimination and what they're rooted in. And as you said, sometimes it is rooted in history, family history,
Yep.
lack of exposure, lack of sensitivity. Some people are just wired differently emotionally.
Sure.
But I think these conversations need to continue. And I really appreciate you bringing your perspective on the fact that it really is a wired reaction.
Yeah.
And there are ways, but I also hear you say the textbook, and as I opened up with, standing up and talking in a webinar, executive order, this is what you should do, this is what you can't do. We have to open up experiential kind of experience where people are actually engaging with each other
Yeah.
to help start rewiring some of those thoughts and connections.
Yep. Like I said, we are wired to belong. And when we start getting exclusive about who we belong to, who we will connect to,
Exactly.
we're actually sabotaging the very thing that will help us to thrive. And so it's, if you're struggling with someone, if you don't like someone, if you do discover an unconscious bias, then find somebody who kind of fits that stereotype and connect. It's amazing what happens when there's a relational exchange
Exactly. And
that
that's what I was trying
proves
to say.
to your brain that, oh, they're not all bad. Oh, this was actually really filling for me.
Right.
And that is going to be what our country needs, what organizations need to move forward is to be willing to have conversations, to interact, to open up. I feel like DEI is an affirmative action. They tried to help us open up. And I think we're still going to need to have some guidelines to help us do that. But beyond that, leaders, I speak directly to leaders, and I would just implore you to increase your capacity to be open to difficult, to things
Right.
that your brain is going to tell you are not safe, especially if it means groups of people because your brain is hijacking you. You're acting out of a space of actually weakness. When you do that, it's not strong. And most leaders I know want to be strong leaders. So increase your capacity. And you do that through rewiring. And if
Right.
you don't know how to do that, then find me.
And I'll make sure that I keep putting out roadmaps to you. And with that, I just want to really close this first episode of hashtag Channel EEO in pursuit of equal opportunity. Julia, again, thank you so very much for
Mhm.
participating in the debut, and more importantly, for inviting this crazy girl into your podcast and showing me it can actually be very fun and enjoyable. I enjoyed the
Absolutely.
heck out of this. And again, thank you very, very much.
You are so welcome. Best of luck.
All right, we'll be in touch soon. Bye bye.
Bye.